Good evening and welcome to today's virtual audit committee meeting. Before we start the formal business of the meeting, I must remind you that the audio of this meeting is being live broadcast on the council's website and the video of the meeting will be published after the meeting. The officers supporting the meeting tonight are Alison Ball, Assistant Director Finance, and we have colleagues from the council's internal and external auditors who will introduce themselves as appropriate. Councillor Collis.
Thank you. Right, welcome everybody to our November meeting. Are there any apologies for absence and substitutions?
No apologies, Chair, but just for the benefit of people listening at home, this evening present we have Councillor Collis, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Greensmith, Councillor Fox, Councillor Clooney and Councillor Lawrence. Okay.
Before we start on the formal business, I've been requested to cover items 9 and 10 in the agenda immediately after item 6, as the people involved in that have another meeting to go on to. I'm assuming everybody is happy with that. Okay. Item 2 is to approve of the correct record. The minutes of the meeting are held on the 7th of July 2020. They're on pages 5 and 6 of the original document pack.
Move it.
Can I have a seconder?
I will.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to vote against? Anybody wishing to abstain? I will assume the rest of you therefore are voting in favour to approve those minutes. Right. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to be received? I assume no. Okay. Item 4 on the agenda is going concern. I'll ask our Assistant Director of Finance to lead us through this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, yes, this report.
You've gone silent.
I think we're having a bit of trouble with Alison's connection, Chair. Just let's see if it solves itself. We can get her back.
Well, while we're trying to get her back, the recommendations on this are on page 15, I think it is. Let's have a look.
I don't think there are any recommendations. I think this is just for noting, isn't it?
Yes.
It's page on page 7. Yeah.
Page 7, not page 15.
Oh, sorry. Yes, beg your pardon. It's at the beginning of the report. I was looking at the end.
Yeah, yeah. We seem to be having problems, Alec.
Yeah, we do seem to be having problems. So, just while Alison isn't here, does anyone have any specific questions that we can sort of collate and then hope that she can get some back in soon? There isn't really anything much more I can say on it from my end, and we'll just have to hope that. I imagine if Alison, because we live not far from each other and we both have notoriously bad signal for our internet, so.
Well, if you can't get back on, it's going to be a problem with all the other items, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of this one, it seems to me that the end of paragraph 3.7 on page 12 is the relevant conclusion that the officer has drawn, and I'm sure that we're all cognizant of what's led to this, and I don't really think we can do anything else but note it.
Which conclusion on which page?
It's 3.7 paragraph starting on page 11, at the end of that on page 12.
Right. Oh, I've got it. Conclusion, yes. Yeah, that's the one thing we are totally dependent on. We cannot do anything about the coronavirus at all. Can I suggest
perhaps if we move on to the next agenda item and come back to this one, because I'm conscious we've got the
yes,
guests from
right, agenda
Yes,
item 5. The external audit.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me okay?
Who is that, please?
It's Anita Pipes from Mazars.
Right, Anita, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you should all have received the audit report. I don't want to go into it in any great detail. I'll take it as read, but I just would like to go through the main highlights, if that's okay, and then take any questions at the end. So, as you know, this has been an unusual year with the pandemic, and normally we'd be signing our accounts or signing your accounts off and giving you an opinion at the end of July. But due to COVID this year, obviously the deadline's been extended to the end of November. And the expectation is that we will be issuing an unqualified audit opinion and an unqualified VFM conclusion. I do have to point out that it is likely to be a late opinion at this stage and set out expectations. And the reason for that is that we're still awaiting the Grant Thornton pension fund assurance letter. Until we get that letter, we are unable to sign your audit opinion because we have to do some procedures on that work. And obviously we haven't received it as of today, which is Tuesday, and the opinion deadline is Monday. So there is going to be some time involved in doing the work when we get it. So it's just to let you know that if there is a late opinion, that it is sort of down to external factors. This year as well, there's also likely to be an emphasis of matter in your audit opinion. And again, this is COVID related. With everything in the property market this year, there's been a material valuation uncertainty on PPE, which is highlighted in the report, which will be put in your letter of representation and will also be in the opinion. And we're also expecting from Grant Thornton that there's going to be material valuation uncertainty on the property pension assets, which is why today you're being asked to agree some wording in note 4 in advance of that. So you're given sort of delegated authority for that. So they're the sort of main key issues to sort of highlight. But sort of just moving through the report, on page 9 is the first of our 3 risks that we've had this year. Management override of controls is one that we look at every year. And you'll be pleased to know that we've not identified any material errors or uncertainties on that area of the account, which is good. Moving on to page 10 is our second audit risk, which is the valuation of plant, equipment and investment properties. And like I said previously, COVID's led to a material valuation uncertainty on PPE, which will be shown as an emphasis of matter in your opinion, but it doesn't lead to a qualification, so it's nothing to sort of worry about. It's just an unusual thing this year, which will affect all local authorities, not just yourself. I just want to point out, actually, on page 10, I do state that the material valuation uncertainty relates to all of your land and buildings. When I wrote the report, the disclosure note that I've been given wasn't the most up-to-date version, so I will have to amend this in a final audit letter because it actually only relates to 3 assets, but it doesn't sort of affect your opinion. I'm just pointing out that I will update you with a corrected version later on. The final risk, the third risk that we have is on the pensions liability. And again, that's a standard risk for all local authorities. As I said earlier on, we're still waiting the Grant Thornton Pension Fund Assurance Letter. And again, like I said, we can't issue the opinion until we receive this. And as of yet, we haven't got it. We're expecting there's going to be a material valuation uncertainty on the property, which is why you're being given that wording in note 4 to agree tonight. There's also likely to be an unadjusted audit misstatement because the pension fund assets are likely to increase. So until we get those figures, I can't sort of quantify that for you, but I'm sort of expecting it to be around £500,000 mark. So you don't actually have to adjust your account for that. It's just something that we will raise in a final audit letter, which will sort of bring together all of the completion of all our work for you. So there's the sort of 3 risks of the three main issues. If moving on to page 13, you probably have already identified under audit fees that we are expecting that there will be a permanent uplift in fees moving forward. And as the report states, this is because we have to do far more work now on pension schemes and on property, plant and equipment, which are significant risks every year. And this is something that we as Mazars have been talking to, obviously, your senior finance officers about and all the finance officers in Nottingham about. It's a fee that will be applied to all our audits, not just you. So I just wanted to let you know that. There's also likely to be another additional fee this year, not a permanent uplift, but that is again related to COVID because there's been additional procedures we've had to carry out this year. And that's probably in the region of 5,000 to 6,000 as stated in the report on page 13. In the report, we raise, each year we have to raise any internal control recommendations if we find any. There's only one that we've raised this year on page 15, and it's just to do with non-disclosure of leases. Leases are there's going to be a new standard brought in 2 years, so it's nothing to worry about at this stage. It's just something that's it's going to have to be disclosed in future years. So as an auditor, I have to raise that with you. So it's been accepted by management and it's not a significant issue, but just something I have to point out to you in the report. On page 16, there's a summary of misstatements. There was only actually a few minor disclosure changes that needed to be made in the accounts this year. So there's one unadjusted misstatement in relation to a COVID grant that was received right at the end of the financial year, which has been posted to 2021, and in our opinion, it should have been posted to 1920. It doesn't result in a change to the accounts, but it's just something that we have to point out because it's above our triviality level. And as I mentioned earlier, there's likely to be a further unadjusted misstatement related to the pension fund, but until I get the Grant Thornton pension fund letter, I can't clarify that and give you a final figure on it. But what will happen is if there is one, it won't result in a change to the actual statement. What we'll have to do is it will be flagged in your letter of representation in the appendix. So it won't result in any changes to the accounts because it's below materiality, or it's likely to be below materiality. So that's sort of a summary of all the accounts issues. In terms of value for money, we carried out our work as normal, and you'd be glad to know we're going to issue an unqualified VFM opinion or conclusion, sorry. So that's good news. And again, we sort of looked into the COVID impact and how, obviously we know that's had an impact on you as a council, and it's had you've had to redo your medium-term financial plan and your forecasting, but we've looked at all of that and we've got no concerns. And part of that was also asking for that going concern report to be done, which you had as the previous agenda item, because COVID has had an impact on all local authorities and on funding streams, and so we just need to make sure you can continue as a going concern, and we've got no issues on that at the present time, which you'll be pleased to know. So really that's sort of a run through the key highlights. I'm happy to take any questions if you've got any.
If you have questions, please raise your hand.
Helen's got a question.
Councillor Greensmith's got her physical hand up, Bob, that you wouldn't be able to see. So. Oh, Bob's gone quiet now. Helen, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, okay. I'm sorry, Bob, if you can't hear me. My
Can hear you now.
All right, I apologise. I was asked to ask my question. Will you be, Anita? Will you be giving us an additional summary of misstatements once you know all the misstatements regarding the pension assets? Or
Yeah.
Case may be.
Yes, what we'll do is we'll issue a final audit letter because our audit isn't concluded at this time. So we'll send out a letter which will summarise if there have been any other adjustments in relation to the pension fund, and I'll also correct the error in relation to the PPE that I mentioned earlier as well. So yeah, you will be notified of any changes. Okay,
and just because you've highlighted it on page 16 of your report that the deferred income grant income was above your triviality level. Was your triviality set at 50,000, or what level was it set at? Sorry.
Oh, I think it might say in the report. Let me just.
I've not been able to see it quickly.
It's on page 8. It says it's 32,000.
Right. Okay. So it's quite a bit above triviality then.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just got my auditor's hat on.
That's all right.
Very fetching. Right. Any other questions from anybody?
Bob, I think we might have Alison back now, so I don't know if there's anything she wants to add.
Sorry about that. So I've missed it all, so I don't know what questions I've got. So has Anita just done her report?
Yes,
yeah, Anita's just run through the highlights of what the report said, and there's been a couple of questions.
Right. Okay. Well, I personally don't have any questions for Anita. I think I know what's in the report. I just obviously don't know what she's said about the latest position on the pension fund.
Yeah, I did actually mention that we're waiting for the Grant Thornton letter, and there's likely to be a delay on the opinion, and there's likely to be the material value and valuation uncertainty on the property and an unadjusted misstatement. So yeah, I've flagged everything.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so
could I ask a question of Alison, please?
Yeah.
Would you like to just explain the misstatement, why the council actually came to the conclusion to put it in this year rather than last year?
Yes, I can, Meredith. The misstatement relates to the first tranche of COVID emergency grant funding, which we were advised by government at the time we were going to receive in April. It actually did come through a couple of days earlier in March, but also the government have also been reporting that through their Delta returns from April. So at the time we took the judgment that this money was a receipt in advance. So that was our judgment at the time, and that's consistent with every other local authority in Nottinghamshire bar one. So we weren't the only ones to take that judgment. I mean, I don't feel that's unreasonable. And we've had that exchange with the external audit, but they feel that we should have recognised that income within the 2019-20 year. That's why that sits as a misstatement, because our judgment on that was slightly different from the auditors.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions? Yes, there's Clooney.
Hi. So on the other side of that, can we hear from the auditors to why they wanted it in 1920, apart from the fact that we received it right at the end of 1920?
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. It's actually a grant. I never remember which way around it is. It's a grant without conditions, I think, which means it should actually be reflected in the year that it's that you receive it. And we actually received advice from our technical team that it shouldn't. That particular tranche 1 funding, which came in right at the year end, should have been posted to 1920 and put into an earmarked reserve, and then it could be used in 2021. And so just following the advice of our technical team, really, because that was something that specifically raised.
Thank you.
So can I summarise that by saying it was an accounting technicality?
It was a different judgment taken on the accounting treatment, which is not material in nature, and of course would have just appeared in a slightly different place on the balance sheet if we'd have gone with the recognition in year.
Okay. Right. Anybody else got any questions? Right. Then I refer to people to...
Helen's got her hand up again.
Bob, Helen's got a hand up.
Right,
Helen.
sorry, I missed it.
Greensmith.
Thank you, Helen. You're muted, Helen. Oh, you're unmuted.
I'm muted. Just an aside, with my work hat on, we're having a lot of this. People are putting their COVID income into the following year, and we're having to bring it into the financial year 1920, which is what this relates to. It boils down to a timing difference and people's perception on it. There's been an awful lot of talk in the accounting world as to how to treat this. So it's one of those things that, because it's unusual, there's been an awful lot of chatter, which I'm sure Anita and Alison will back me up on. That it's not a major issue. It's a timing thing that us accountants have all had to have a discussion about as to which financial year it goes in and how to deal with it. So I'm glad to actually see it, because every accounts I'm doing at the moment, it's something that I'm having to deal with myself. So it's one of those things.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Okay, if there's no more discussion on this, then can we move to the recommendation on page 15 of the original document pack, that members note the MESAR's external audit report for 2019-20.
Do we?
Happy to second it. Second.
Do we have to take notice of the fact that it isn't complete?
I assume we're accepting it as it is.
As is.
Any amendments will come back to us. Is that correct, Anita?
That's correct, yeah. We will follow up with a final audit letter. So if there's any additional changes, we'll then reflect them in a final audit letter. So yeah, you accept this as it is, and we'll let you know of any additional changes, which are really likely to be related to the pension fund that I talked about.
Okay. You happy with that, Councillor Lawrence?
Of course.
Thank you. Right. Had a proposer?
Happy to propose.
Seconder?
Happy to second.
Okay. Any objections? And it's passed. Okay. Shall we go back and do item 4 now?
Shall we try?
We'll try.
We'll try. Yes, thank you, Chair. So yes, this report on going concern presents my assessment as Chief Financial Officer of the going concern status of the Council for the purpose of preparing and certifying the statements of accounts this year. So just by way of background, the CIPFA Accounting Code of Practice requires the statements of accounts to be prepared on a going concern basis, which means that the expectation is that the Council and its functions and services will continue for the foreseeable future, and that it's able to do so within the current and anticipated resources available. So for the accounts, this assessment specifically relates to whether we can continue to operate as a council for a period of 12 months from the date of signing the audit opinion. So whilst the accounts have always been prepared and certified on a going concern basis, due to the increased risks and uncertainties surrounding our financial position in the light of COVID-19, a separate report has been prepared this year to highlight for the committee the factors that have been taken into account in arriving at the going concern assessment. So those factors are fully explained in the report. But if I can just summarise to say that that assessment includes a review of the current financial position. So that includes consideration of last year's outturn position and the current level of reserves that are available, which demonstrate the continued good management of the budget and the adequacy of those reserves, which currently stand at 9.9 million altogether. And are above our minimum levels of approximately 1 million that we require that we have to set for when we set the budget. So they're well above the minimum level, and the majority of those are available to use should the need arise. And so just moving on to the council's projected financial position. The 2021 annual budget and medium-term plan was approved by Budget Council in March, and as CFO I confirmed the robustness of those estimates and adequacy of reserves in the light of the strategic risk issues that were being faced at that time. However, in response to the increased risks and financial challenges arising from COVID, which are detailed in paragraph 3.6 of the report, a mid-year review of the medium-term financial plan has been completed to assess the sustainability of the plan and the strategic options for managing any emerging budget pressures, which might require further use of reserves and further efficiencies on top of the current approved efficiency programme that we have. And any recommendations with regards to that strategy going forward will be made to Budget Council in March, and we'll do that in the context of the spending review that's hopefully going to be announced tomorrow, and the local government finance settlement that will come shortly after that. So the final two factors that are considered in the going concern assessment are the council's governance arrangements, which are well established and robust, as detailed in our annual governance statement, which was considered by this committee in July in draft form. And finally, the regulatory and control environment that we operate in, which is highly legislated and obviously has a lot of central government control within it. And as a last resort, central government does provide a backstop to prevent failure, but that's not ever a place that we would seek to be. We will always seek to manage our own financial position and ensure that we have a sustainable medium-term financial plan. But the government have acknowledged this year, though, that there are some authorities that might be facing unmanageable pressures, and they will be prepared to step in if that occurs. We don't expect to be one of those authorities. So taking all of those factors into consideration, together with the Council's strong track record for financial management, I have concluded that the Council can continue to operate as a going concern for the period of 12 months from the date of signing the opinion, and the recommendation for this committee is to note the assessment, and that recommendation is detailed on page 7 of the report, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, everybody happy with that?
Yeah, I'll move that we note it.
Can I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Okay. Anybody against? Then it's duly noted. Thank you. Right, that's 4 and 5 done. Okay, we're on now to item 6 on the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So item 6 is the Council's annual governance statement and statement of accounts for 2019-20. So this report requests the approval of the governance statement. They are, well, both statements, they are presented on the delayed timescales due to COVID-19. So that we've had some new regulations enabled, which now enable us to certify the accounts by the 30th of November. So as detailed in the report, the regulations require that the annual governance statement must be approved by this committee in advance of the approval of the statement of accounts. So can I ask, Chair, that we take recommendation 1 on page 27 first and vote on that before we move on to the remaining recommendations?
I would agree.
Yeah, so if before we do that, if I could just say that the final version of the annual governance statement is on page 37 of the supplementary agenda pack for your consideration. Members will recall considering the draft annual governance statement at its meeting on the 7th of July. And I can confirm that there have only been some very minor wording changes in section 7.2 to as part of the COVID-19 pandemic financial impact. And that's been simply to reflect the more up-to-date position of the financials and updates also for the recent announcement of a 1-year only spending review, where we were previously expecting a 3-year spending review. So there have been no other changes. So just to remind you briefly that the annual governance statement reviews the effectiveness of our governance framework, and that includes assurance from our own managers and from external and internal audit. And they didn't highlight any significant control or risk management concerns, and the head of internal audit did conclude in the annual audit opinion that we've got an effective framework for risk management, governance and internal control. So the annual governance statement does cover just 2019-20, so for the majority of the year was not affected by COVID-19, and the impact of COVID-19 in that year was not material, but it is recognised in the annual governance statement that the impact of COVID-19 is significant, and a number of actions were included in the action plan in respect of that, and that is included on page 45 of the agenda pack. So, Chair, I'll pause there if we can consider recommendation 1, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Right. Any questions from anybody on recommendation 1 only at this point?
I'll move it.
Any seconder?
Yeah, I'll second. Oh, hang on. Boyd's got his hand up.
Boyd, you got a question?
No, to second. So I'll
Right.
mute it. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's been proposed and seconded that we approve the annual governance statement for 2019-20, which is Appendix 1. Anybody voting against? Then I assume that is approved. Okay, Alison, you want to proceed now with the next bit?
Yep, thank you very much, Chair. So just moving on now to the annual statement of accounts, which are covered by recommendations 2 to 4 on page 27. So just by way of a bit of background, I know Anita's already explained to you her view on the accounts, so I won't try and cover all of that detail again. But just to say that there were no significant technical accounting changes affecting the 2019-20 accounts. COVID has had an impact, certainly in terms of the accounts closure deadlines, which I've already said have been amended by regulation to require publication of the accounts by the 30th of November. But also in terms of the key impact has been in the valuation of assets, both within our own property, plant and equipment, and also the pension fund property assets. Both of which are being valued for some asset categories on the basis of a material valuation uncertainty due to the property market being affected by the pandemic. So this is disclosed in the notes to the account. So it's disclosed in note 4, major sources of estimation uncertainty, and note 13, property, plant and equipment, and note 14, investment property. However, our valuer did complete a year-end review at the beginning of July and did not report any material differences, but maintained material valuation uncertainty in respect of 3 assets. So as reported by Anita, the key issue outstanding is assurance on the pension fund audit, which means that the auditor's not yet able to provide their final audit completion report or audit opinion, but they anticipate that an additional disclosure note may be required, and that additional disclosure note is detailed in the report at paragraph 3.3.4 in bold on page 33. And that explains that we're expecting a material valuation uncertainty on the pension fund. So we don't yet know whether that whether we'll need to add that disclosure note to our accounts, but so subject to the outcome of the pension fund audit and the Mazars opinion, the Mazars assurance work, then when we've got the outcome of that, we'll know whether we need to add that disclosure note into our accounts. So that's the reason for the wording of the recommendation. I do understand this is perhaps a little bit confusing this year, but we are in confusing times. But recommendation 2 enables the approval of the statement of accounts as detailed in Appendix 2 without the additional disclosure note, but also with the inclusion of that additional wording at paragraph 3.3.4 if that addition is required when we've got the final audit report, when that becomes available. So we're effectively asking for committee to approve the accounts to cover both eventualities without the need to reconvene this committee. But if there are any other changes other than that that's described in paragraph 3.3.4, then we may need to reconvene and have another meeting to approve the statement of accounts. Anita advised me earlier today that we weren't expecting that to happen, but there is a possibility of that. So the other key item that I wanted to mention was the unadjusted misstatement, but we've already had a conversation about that under the previous item. So I won't go into that any further, other than to say that because that's been raised by as a non-material misstatement, that will be and it's included in the audit report. It will be included in the letter of representation. And that's included in the appendix to that letter. And that letter of representation is included in Appendix 3 at this report. And that letter of representation is my letter to the auditor to let them know that we've got the required assurances. So it provides our assurances to external audit with regard to the accuracy and completeness of the accounts. And committee are recommended to approve that letter as part of this report.
Okay,
and so
yes, yeah, before you finish, sorry,
I was just going to conclude, Chair, that just following approval of the accounts, we will be waiting for the final audit opinion before we're able to publish the accounts, which might be delayed beyond the 30th of November date that's laid in regulation. But we are sitting alongside every other local authority, I think perhaps certainly in Nottinghamshire. I don't know whether Anita's can say how much wider that goes, but it's a very common theme for all authorities.
Okay. Thank you, Alison. Yes, Liz. You need to unmute, Liz.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I just got a question about that. Saying about the Grant Thornton delay. Do we know why this delay is happening?
And Anita might be able to answer that one better than I. Yeah, she's coming in.
I think it's the nature of this year and the fact that COVID's had such a big impact on property and on the market. And there's probably been I can't really answer for Grant Thornton because obviously they're a different firm, but I just presume it's that's caused the delay. It's unfortunate that it's so late. It's so late in coming to us because it is stopping us from carrying out our work. And like I mentioned before, it's not just a case of when we get the assurance letter from them that we can just sign your opinion, because there's some additional work we have to do. And we've got quite a few authorities that we have to do it on, so there's obviously sort of a resort in it thing. But like Alison said, it's the same for everybody, and not that I know it applies to other local authorities. Leicestershire is still waiting for theirs, for example, as well. So.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or queries? Right, then I'm going to suggest that we take recommendations 2, 3 and 4 en bloc.
Move it.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Any voting against? Any abstaining? Then I'm taking that as that is approved. Okay, thank you. Right. We'll now look at agenda items 9 and 10. We'll start off with agenda item 9, which is covered in your first pack, pages 41 to 101. Alison, who's going to lead on this?
I think it's good. I think Gurpreet's going to come in and lead on this one, Chair.
Thank you.
On BDO. He's there.
Thanks, I'm here.
Oh,
okay,
hi,
can you all hear
Gurpreet.
me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. So there's 2 papers that we have from internal audit for this committee. The first one is our progress report, which I'll pick up, and then that's followed by the next agenda item, which is our follow-up report, which Kate Ball, who's my colleague, she'll pick up the follow-up report. So obviously we have not that long ago been appointed, so this progress report just summarises where we have got to so far. You'll see after the first page of contents page, there's a summary of our work to date so far. So there's a couple of reports that we're reporting to this committee. So we've done a review on sickness management and another one on council tax and business rates, otherwise known as NNDR. So I'll talk through those reports briefly. And then you'll see there's a series of reviews which are in the fieldwork stage. So there's 5 there which are bulleted, from budget management and efficiency down to waste and recycling. So those are all in the fieldwork stage. On the next page is just a quick table summary as a visual to see where we're up to. So you can see the 2 reports that I mentioned which are complete and coming to this committee. And I'll talk about the opinions for those in a moment, but they're both very positive opinions. Substantial is the highest opinion rating that we offer as a service. And that's what we've attributed to the council tax and business rates review. And sickness management is a split opinion, but a moderate is still a positive outcome. But I'll talk about that in a moment. So I think it's just worth briefly saying about internal audit progress. We catch up regularly with Alison and with others in the authority. We feel pretty good about where we are in terms of the programme of work. Things can be a little bit slower because of COVID in terms of trying to see out audits. But you can see from there's quite a lot that are in the fieldwork stage. It does mean your March meeting will have quite a number of reports coming to it. I mean, in a normal world, this would be profiled a little bit better over the year. So we feel confident about completing the opinion on time, but it would mean that there's going to be a large volume of reports coming to your next meeting. For the next page, we just highlight from the 2 reports that we have issued, so on the sickness management and separately on the council tax and business rates review, any medium or high findings that we have issued, just so you can be highlighted with any key areas that we've picked up. So there's only 1 medium or high finding across the 2 reports, and that is in relation to sickness management, where there's a medium finding. I'll talk about this briefly in a little bit more detail in the reports, but on a high level, there are different stages in the management of sickness at the authority. When somebody reports a sickness, they start in stage 1. If the sickness is for a longer period of time or of sufficient regularity, they'll move to stage 2. We tested samples of these, and there are some instances, not significant numbers of instances, otherwise we would have had it as a high. There were some instances where some of the documentation behind this wasn't always completed either timely or recorded on the system. On the whole, however, we were pretty happy that the system was used and the processes were followed, hence we gave a substantial moderate opinion. On the next page, which is key performance indicators, obviously we are a new service and we just want to try and make sure we get feedback from those we work with. At the end of every audit that we do, once it's final, we ask those who have been involved to complete a survey. And you can see the results here for the 2 that we have done. The highest score that we can achieve is it's on a 1 to 5 scale. So everything is scored a 4 or a 5. And you can see there in terms of our understanding of the council communication, whether we've added value or the overall audit experience, both of the audits received a 5. And so I'd like to take some comfort from that. It's still early days that actually we're getting some good feedback from those we're working with, where we're seeing out reviews. And actually there was a nice comment there from the person we worked with on the sickness management review who thought the audit worked very well. It is a little bit more tricky with COVID, but we're getting some good feedback. Hopefully that trend continues in the other reviews later in the year. So we'll keep reporting that to you. And just following on from that is a sector update. We send this to each committee. It just picks out some kind of key things that are happening within local government or wider public sector that might be of interest. Happy if anyone has any particular questions on there, but it's sometimes a useful flick or a read just to see what's happening elsewhere. Clearly, obviously, this week, tomorrow with the spending review, I imagine there'll be some new articles and things going on once we know how much local authorities may or may not be supported. There is one that's of interest there, which is the kind of the 3rd page of the sector update, kind of page 9 of this actual report around IT. You may be aware that there's quite a large cyber attack at Redcar in Cleveland Borough Council. The reason I highlight that one is because we do have a cyber risk review in this year's plan. It's clearly a heightened area of risk for most local authorities or all organisations, especially with more use of technology and IT and kit. And so, we will be trying to pick up the lessons, not just from what's happened here, but in other local authorities, and bring that to the review that we'll be conducting. So that covers a kind of an update on where we are. And then just briefly on the reports, because I guess I'm mindful that you wouldn't have seen any of our reports before, so may not necessarily be familiar with the format of them, but I'll briefly go through it. If there's any questions, let me know. So we do give, for each report that we issue, and you'll see this on the Appendix 1, the cover page for Council Tax NNDR, we give you an opinion for the design of the controls and then a separate opinion for the effectiveness. So the design of the controls is your processes, your systems, all those things which are there to try and help people make sure that they comply with the arrangements that are meant to be in place. And the effectiveness is then, are people actually following those arrangements? So you could have something that's very well designed, clear policies, procedures for staff to follow, but no one ever follows them. So you could have a very strong design, but actually a weak level of effectiveness. With council tax, we think both are substantial. So this area, there's very few findings that we have. There's a couple of low findings, but as you go through the report, you'll see the exec summary, which highlights the findings. It provides a background. We do list out our good practice about all the areas where we found things to be operating well. Then we highlight the key findings and a conclusion. And then following on from that are then each of the key findings in detail. So the two low findings here is one just about documenting case records relating to council tax, particularly following up where somebody might have a discount applied, whether they're incarcerated or whether they're in hospital or something else, having notes of when you may check up on whether that house is still a single person occupancy or has a different discount applied, could mean the authority apply the discount at the right time. And having better notes on that would help that be more proactive, which is the first finding. And the second finding is just the council have a fair collection and debt recovery policy, which was meant to be updated in June 2020. It hasn't been updated yet, largely I think delays just due to COVID and other priorities. So it's making sure that that's updated. But apart from that, our testing didn't find other instances of non-compliance or errors, and so therefore we think it's substantial. And the last one, and then I'll take questions on all of the different areas that I've gone through, is the second report in the annex, which is around sickness management. Here the design is substantial, effectiveness is moderate, so a positive outcome. And just briefly in terms of what kind of led to the moderate, if you like, it rather than substantial. So whilst there is a policy, there are clear arrangements in place to support people to document and manage sickness within the authority. There were some areas of documentation where there could have been improvements in how that was documented or the timeliness of documentation. And therefore it's not fully working effectively where there was almost no non-compliance. There were instances where things weren't fully complied with, and therefore we moved that to a moderate based largely on the medium finding, but there are some lows that we've highlighted as well. So I'll pause there. So if there's any questions either on the progress of internal audit, the sector update, or on the individual reports, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gurpreet. Has anybody got any questions for Gurpreet? Yes, Liz, can you unmute? Good.
Yeah, I have done. It wasn't not so much a question, but just a comment for. I'm not entirely sure if it comes under Alison or whoever it comes under, about the council tax collection and things about you know, what a good system we seem to have and how successful we are being at collecting the council tax. So just wanted to say that looks really good, because obviously it's a massive part of our operations and income. Really important that it's working well. So thank you to everybody.
Thanks very much. I mean, that's something that's we're quite under pressure with this year because of COVID. So collection rates are a little bit behind, but that's perhaps something that we would expect. But obviously that's where we will be looking at some of that good practice example that Gurpreet's included in his report in terms of the ethical debt policy. To make sure that we are treating taxpayers fairly, based in accordance with their ability to pay. I think that was quite an interesting document there. So obviously we do already have a fair debt policy, but we'll be looking to strengthen that and relate it more to those issues. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments to make?
Can I just say something else, Bob?
Yes.
Sorry. I've realised on page 56 of our report, this is in with the council tax bit. In the second paragraph down, it mentioned that this was signed off and approved by board meeting, and I think that was probably full council.
It's council.
Yeah,
it's council.
Okay.
I just got a question to Alison, really. The recommendations, which have all been agreed, will progress on them be reported back to this committee, or do we wait until the auditors actually do this again? Because this is a rolling program, isn't it?
Yeah, so any action that appears in here, Gurpreet will correct me if I'm wrong, will appear in a follow-up report. So internal audit will look to ensure that we implement those actions, and if we don't, then you'll be notified, and we can ask why that's not happened.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Right, can I suggest therefore that we look at the recommendation on page 41 of your original document pack, that members receive the report and note actions taken or to be taken. Can I have a proposer?
Yes. Yep, I'll propose it. Could I also say that?
Second.
Could I also say that we ought to congratulate the department on their these two good reports, but and the internal auditor for finding out how good our departments are. You can put that in better language than I've got it.
Thank you. Right. Anybody voting against that? Any abstentions? And I'm assuming it is fully carried. Okay, agenda item 10. The internal audit follow-up report.
Thank you, Chair. Kate Hall from BDO. This leads nicely on from the conversation we're just having around follow-up of recommendations. So we've followed up on all the legacy RSM audit recommendations for the last years, due by this month, so November 2020. We've discussed all of the recommendations with the relevant managers to assess if they've been completed or whether they're still in progress. So where a recommendation is rated a high or a medium, we've obtained the appropriate evidence to support their completion. And you'll see within the report that we've included a detailed narrative against each recommendation regarding if they've been completed or they still need to address that recommendation. So as of November, there were 61 recommendations where the initial implementation date had passed, which we followed up. It's good news, and we reported that 2/3 of the recommendations have now been signed off as complete. However, there's still 23 recommendations which have missed their initial implementation date and are still in progress. But there's only 1 high, 12 medium and 10 low. So we've discussed the ones that are still in progress with the appropriate manager and agreed a short extension, of which we expect to report back at the next audit committee on their progress. We have acknowledged that most of the recommendations have missed their implementation date because of COVID service interruptions this year. I wasn't going to go into any more detail than that, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Alison. Anybody got any questions?
It's a good report. So.
It's not a question, just to add a bit of context from an internal audit point of view. It's just to say, follow-up is a critical part of what we do. We issue reports as the ones that I outlined. And obviously we are still new to the authority, and this is our first follow-up report, and these aren't our recommendations, these are RSM ones that we're following up on. Obviously our ones will come into the mix for the next committee. I think across the board, across the sector, whether it's local authorities, NHS or other public sector clients, we're seeing follow-up is slipping, but understandably because of COVID. And I think we're seeing a bit of a difference, I guess, in different audit committees and their approach. Some might kind of say, yep, we'll kind of let one pass, and then the next time round we'll push a bit more to try and see, whether we can turn some more of these into implemented, or if you're happy with kind of where they are. But I would just kind of emphasize, from our point of view, anything that we can do or work with Alison and others to try and increase implementation rates whilst working into COVID and understanding people's circumstances. Our reports are one thing, but actually until they're implemented and the actions are done, that then actually makes an impact on governance, risk and control. So for me, the follow-up is arguably as important, or if not more important, than the reports themselves, because it demonstrates how things are being implemented. So, we'll do our best to keep trying to embed ourselves in the organisation and move these forward. But hopefully there'll be improvement as time goes on, because most organisations have struggled with follow-up because of the impact of COVID.
Thank you, Guppy.
Yeah. It's perhaps worth adding there, Chair, that perhaps the members will recall that the last follow-up report that RSM did into this committee, the progress wasn't very good. So we did take some action there and report back through the teams about emphasise the importance of ensuring these recommendations are implemented, and I think we are seeing some of the results of that through here, but COVID has delayed. But yeah, I think it's within your gift to ask anybody to come in and explain why they've not implemented any follow-up actions, if perhaps if they've not been able to implement them on a second review, or at any point that you see fit, really.
Okay, thank you, Alison. I see Jennifer Thomas has got her hand up.
Hello, yes, I just wanted to say that I do note that on a number of these outstanding and incomplete actions, that in the comments they do note that BDO is undertaking other reviews that will further address them, and I want to say simply that I do look forward to seeing the greater detail and progress on those, particularly in the cyber review.
I would agree. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Can I have a proposal therefore for the recommendation on page 103? We received the report and note.
Propose that.
Sorry. Who's that?
Boyd.
Thank you, Boyd. Any seconder, please?
Yep. I'll second.
Thank you. Right. Anyone voting against that recommendation? Anyone abstaining? Then I take that as carried. Okay, thank you very much. Right, that leaves us the last two items. Just 7 and 8.
No, yeah.
Thank the representatives from our internal auditors for what they've been doing. Right, on to items 7 and 8 then. Item 7. Independent review into the oversight of local audit and to position transparency of local authority financing reporting. In other words, the Redmond report review. Over to you, Alison.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this report's here for your information, for noting today. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Redmond review. It's that's what it's most commonly known as in the out there in the field. Essentially, what this the Redmond review did was provide an update on. Sorry, I'll start again. What this report presents to you are the recommendations that are arising from that Redmond review, and it looks at external audit provision and financial reporting in local government. And what it seeks to do is, as part of its recommendations, is to improve both the quality of the external audit and financial reporting, and also its transparency and accountability. So the findings and recommendations of the review are summarised in the report, and I'll take those as read, if I may, and just highlight a few key issues for you. So first of all, one of the key items was about the procurement of external audit, which has been leading to the current methods leading to prices and quality that is too low. So that's what they've concluded, and they were recommending that there's an establishment of a new Office of Local Audit Regulation, and along with that they want a change in audit completion deadlines, extending it from July to September, because they don't feel there's sufficient time for a quality audit to be completed. And they're also recommending a review of the current fee structure with a view to improving the resourcing of those audits. Secondly, in terms of governance arrangements, they're making recommendations. It's making recommendations about the role and makeup of the audit committees to improve accountability, with recommendations relating to options for an independent member, and for training for both members and officers to improve that accountability. And finally, in terms of reporting, the recommendation there is for an improvement for accessibility, transparency to enable improved access to members of the public to ease for the readers of the accounts by producing a summary statement of accounts, essentially. And we did, in fact, we did used to have to produce one of these before, and then that dropped by the wayside. So I imagine this will be something that's similar that comes along. But these are just recommendations at this point. So they have now gone to government for consideration. And if those recommendations are accepted, then some of them will require regulatory or legislative changes, and a further report will be brought back to the committee at the time the outcomes are known. So for the time being, Chair, as I said, this recommendation is for members just to note that this review is happening, and that recommendation's on page 19.
Thank you, Alison. I think there are some very good recommendations in here. We'll know more when the government's finished looking at it. Okay, the recommendation that members note the report. Have a proposer.
Move it.
Seconder.
Seconded.
I'm assuming there's nobody voting against. And that's carried. Okay, item 8. Corporate Risk Management Report, Quarter 2, 2020-21. Over to you again, Alison.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is our usual update for this committee on the current level of assurance that can be provided against each of our corporate risks. So the Corporate Risk Register and supporting comments as at the end of September 2020 are appended to this report. And this includes a summary of all the control gaps currently identified within the Council's Corporate Risk Register. The last update of the Corporate Risk Register, the Corporate Risk Scorecard, was presented to this committee on the 7th of July. That provided the Quarter 4 2019-20 position. Due to the required timing of the change in timing for the Audit Committee this financial year to accommodate the deferred reporting requirements for the Statement of Accounts to November, we've had a delay, and this report now presents both quarters 1 and 2 monitoring for 2021 of the Corporate Risk Scorecard for consideration. So we're bringing both of those together. So you will be fully aware that the risks arising from and the impact at quarter 2 has been reflected fully in the risk register, and the impact of COVID-19 has been reflected fully through here, and also in a number of reports to members, to other members, including cabinet reports on the response and reset work in respect of COVID, and in terms of the Cabinet's quarterly budget monitoring and performance reports, which we've both had quarters 1 and 2 reported already. And also related to corporate risk is the annual governance statement, which includes COVID related impacts, which you've considered here again today. So that's just we've said that's why we've got 2 quarters being presented together. And some of the major changes here are related to the COVID impacts. So the appendix gives the details of the full actions that have been completed during quarters 1 and 2 against each corporate risk. And in summary, we've had 2 changes to current risk levels to those reported during quarter 1. One of those is in risk 1, failure to prevent the budget from overheating, which has deteriorated to a red risk. That's due to the COVID-19 related financial impacts. And risk 12 is the other change, which is failure to react to an environmental incident, which has actually improved from amber to green. And I'll come back to those as we go through the report. I will take the report as read, if I may, and just focus on the key risk issues that have been arising through quarters 1 and 2. And so, as I say, the first one is the risk 1, failure to prevent the budget overheating. This will be very clear to all of you why this has happened. So this is due to the COVID related financial impacts. So you'll see they're listed in the report are the actions that we took in reporting out through both quarters 1 and 2. In quarter 1, we reported to Cabinet an overspend of £420,000 at that stage, which was primarily due to COVID, not all of it. We did have additional pay award to accommodate as well this year. But Cabinet did approve the use of earmarked reserves. So that's something I've talked about earlier as part of the going concern report. So they did approve that to enable us to maintain within the overall Cabinet's maximum budget. So there were other aspects reported in there that it was alerted that COVID-19 had got significant uncertainty related to it, and all of those risks were detailed in the report and are listed here as well. So there are rising demand pressures. Impact on income is very significant for the council. And as we look to the future, then and collection rates we've talked about already at this meeting as well. Then in quarter 2, we've provided a further update. So we have actually seen a slightly improved position in terms of COVID. And that's enabled us in quarter 2 to do actually a transfer back to reserves so that money is available to support the budget going forward and any emerging pressures in the medium-term financial plan. So whilst that's still held at a red risk at the moment because of the uncertainties. So since we've done the quarter 2 monitoring report, we of course went into another lockdown, and that's obviously having a further impact on our budget and our income streams as the leisure centres have closed. But we will be keeping a close eye on that, and I can anticipate that we'll start to see some improvements in this corporate risk during next quarter, or certainly by the end of the year. We'll have a good grip on that. So just moving on to failure to maintain financial integrity, which is risk 2. So this is effectively our medium-term financial plan position. This doesn't change, it stays at a red. You'll perhaps recall that with this drop down in or increased in risk level during quarter 4 of 2019-20 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the level of risk really just still stays the same there. We have done some medium-term financial plan scenario update and the mid-year review that was required as part of the annual governance statement that we've talked about earlier on this agenda. Was presented to Cabinet, in November. So they have received a full update of where we expect to be and what the likely impact is. Of course, this is still really quite uncertain. So those risks are still really quite difficult to get a handle on where we will be going, what the level of impact will be. But our best assessment at this time is that we will probably be there's a potential for a funding gap of about £400,000, which might mean that we need to do further efficiency savings or might need to take further money from reserves in the early years. That we won't know whether that's the case though until we've got the local government finance settlement and the spending review that's going to be announced by the Chancellor tomorrow. We'll have a better idea of what our position is as we move through this budget process, and we will bring all of that together as part of our reporting into Budget Council in March. And if we need to, we'll be making recommendations to Council for any future efficiency savings that we might need to make to enable us to maintain a balanced budget. Of course, that scenario that we reported to Cabinet in November, did also highlight that there is potential for a worst case scenario than the one we were presenting. So if income losses are become worse than expected, then that's something that again we're going to have to deal with. But our reserve levels at the moment enable us to manage that, and we do have time over the medium term plan. And I think this is something that we're very used to doing, is proper medium term planning, and that's a good discipline that will continue to ensure that we've got a sustainable medium term position. Of course, there is hope that if the situation does worsen, that we might get some further funding from central government as well. And it's probably is highlighted there that COVID has also delayed the fair funding review. So we've only getting we've not got the fair funding review, we've not got the business rates retention sorted, and we only have a 1 year spending review and 1 year settlement. So that just continues to inhibit us, inhibit good financial planning. But that's a situation that we have to work with. But it does add further risk there. So if I can now just move on to risk 5. So this is our other red risk. So that this thing will have covered all of the red risks that the council has. This is our failure to properly utilise existing IT and specifically relates to data loss. The issue that we have that's making this a red risk is our Abritas housing needs system. So you'll recall this has been here a number of times now where we've been highlighting this as a red risk. And this is just to remind you, this is to do with GDPR compliance, that the database for the housing needs system is a shared database with Rushcliffe and Broxtowe Borough Councils, and we can't at the moment compartmentalise the database so we can actually view each other's data. So that's a GDPR compliance issue. What I can confirm for you is that we have secured the contract to sort the system out, and the work is underway, and we're hoping that that's going to now be completed by December. There was a little bit of a delay on that due to COVID, but hopefully we'll now be prioritising that, and I would hope that we will see that this particular risk drop back into the amber level. It will come out of red and into amber, but you'll see there that action, there are still some actions outstanding before we can actually bring that back to green. So we've got the cyber security risk assessment. So we've got the cyber audit that's happening this year. So hopefully some of the recommendations from there will also help us to bring that risk down. So just the other one to specifically mention is the one where we've got the improvement. So that's risk 12. So the fail to react to an environmental incident. With this risk did worsen due to COVID because of the business continuity plans were not all up to date. But and that was an outstanding risk on the register. But what we've done through COVID, and it's helped us to accelerate the production of business continuity plans, and not only have we got them for a response to pandemic, we've now also got a full suite of business continuity plans for all event types. And alongside that, Cabinet have also approved the business continuity policy and the business continuity impact assessment guidance. So that's actually where we've actually been able to gain some real improvements on risks in that area. So that's actually moved from amber to a green risk. So I'll leave it there, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions on any of the other items if members have any. Hello? Am I talking to myself? Is it just me? Have we lost?
No,
I would like to thank Alison for an excellent presentation there. Very thorough, very detailed, very informative. Has anybody got any questions for her?
Well, I suppose the other question, who will take over Helen Barrington's ownership?
Who will take over Helen Barrington as monitoring officer?
Well, until there's
Oh,
someone
with the risk ownerships. Well, that's something we'll have to look at the new structure. So if they're monitoring officer related, then they're likely to go to Fran Wiley, who will from now on be the council's monitoring officer. I mean, Fran. So for example, Fran will be looking after health and safety. She'll have that in her remit, so she'll take that on. Let's see what the others are. So recruitment of staff.
Yeah, I think appointments like this will have to go through the Appointments and Conditions of Service Committee.
Yeah, I think because of the restructure and the so you're right, that still has to be confirmed. But Fran, I think was following Helen's departure was the only other candidate that could slot into the monitoring officer role.
Thanks.
Okay. Right, any other questions?
3, 4, and 5, isn't it? That Helen was responsible for. So.
Yeah. So where Bob is right, I suppose for the SLT ownership of these risks, that certainly has not been determined yet.
No.
So that certainly does have to go through appointments and conditions of service committee.
Okay, has anybody else got any questions for Alison? Right, can I suggest therefore that we go to the recommendation that from page 25 that members note the progress of actions identified by the Corporate Risk Register. Have I got that right?
Move it.
Moved. Any seconder?
Second.
Right. Any objections against? Any abstentions? Then I'm assuming it has been approved. Thank you. I think that is the final item on there.
Can I wish everybody a Merry Christmas if I don't see anybody before then?
It's a very good idea. I'm not going to ask you all to join in singing a chorus of Happy Christmas, but I hope you all have one, and a healthy one. I would like to thank Alison for her presentations, and I would like to thank our two guests, Gurpreet and Kate, I think it is, for their involvement today.
And Anita.
Oh, Anita, yes. And I now call the meeting to a close.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.